Good evening, boys and girls, and welcome to our next edition of Tucked In Tuesday. This week we're going to be reading The Three Little Pigs and the Somewhat Bad Wolf by Mark Teague. Do you recognize that name? He's the same author that wrote our story last week, Pigsty. So let's find out what happens when the somewhat bad wolf comes to town. The Three Little Pigs and the Somewhat Bad Wolf by Mark Teague. Once there were three little pigs. They lived on a farm as most pigs do and were happy as most pigs are. Then one day the farmer told them that he and his wife were moving to Florida. He paid the pigs for their good work and sent them on their way. "Let's buy potato chips," said the first pig. "Let's buy sody pop," said the second pig. "Let's buy building supplies," said the third pig, who was altogether unpig-like. Reluctantly, the others agreed. The first pig decided to build a straw house. Since straw is cheap, he had plenty of money left over for potato chips. The second pig decided to build a stick house. Sticks are practically free, so he had lots of money left over for sody pop. The third pig decided to build a brick house. She spent all of her money on bricks and mortar, but the man at the hardware store gave her a sandwich. Soon the straw house was finished. It was dusty and musty, but the first pig did not mind. He rocked in his hammock and ate potato chips. Soon after that, the stick house was done. It was small and there was no room for a bathtub, but the second pig did not mind. He took a mud bath and drank sody pop. Brick by brick, the third pig worked on her house. Sometimes the other pigs would come by to watch. They had a wonderful time. Finally, the brick house was finished. It was big, beautiful, and strong. The third pig was very happy. She filled a basket with vegetables from her garden. The next day, a wolf came to town. He was very hungry and somewhat bad. He went to a donut shop, but it was closed. He went to a hot dog stand, but it was locked. Finally, he went to a pizza parlor, but he wasn't allowed in. He left in a very bad mood. Soon he came to a straw house. It smelled like pig. "I like pig," he said, not in a friendly way. He banged on the door. "Who is it?" called the first pig. "The wolf. Open up or I'll blow your house down." "I think the door is stuck," said the pig. So the wolf huffed and he puffed and he blew the house down. "Can't believe that worked," he said. He had never blown a house down before. Quickly, the first pig got on his scooter and sped away. The wolf moved on, hungry but confident. He came to another house, this one built of sticks. "Same piggy smell," he said. He knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called the second pig. "Wolf. Open up or I'll blow your house down. Trust me," he added. "I've done it before." "I think the door is jammed," said the pig. So the wolf took an enormous breath, and he huffed, and he puffed, and he blew the house down. "I'm amazed that works," he said. Meanwhile, pig number 2 got on his bike and rode away. The wolf was still hungry, very, very hungry. The hungry wolf came to a beautiful brick house. He noticed a familiar scooter and bicycle, and the house reeked of pig. The somewhat bad wolf rang the doorbell. "Who is it?" called the pigs. "The wolf. Open up or I'll blow this house down." "Oh no," said the pigs. "Not now, we're watching our favorite show." The starving wolf took a humongous breath, and he huffed, and he puffed, and he huff, huff, puffed, and puff, huff, huffed, and huff, huff, huffy, puff, huffed. After the huffing and puffing stopped, the third pig said, "Do you think he's still out there?" The three pigs looked through the window and saw the wolf collapsed on the lawn. "Look at the poor guy," said the first pig. "He's exhausted. Maybe he needs some potato chips." The second pig added, "and some sody pop." The three pigs revived the wolf with some smelling salts and invited him in. The somewhat bad wolf was embarrassed. "I was so hungry I could not think straight." "Have a potato chip," said the pig. "Have a sody pop," said the second pig. "Never mind that stuff," said the third pig. "Dinner is almost ready." Since their houses were wrecked, the first 2 pigs moved in with the 3rd pig. "My house, my rules," she said. She made them clean their rooms before they went out to play. The wolf stayed too, but there was no more huffing and no more puffing, and he was hardly ever bad again. The end. I just love a good story with a happy ending. I'm so glad that the pigs and the wolf were able to find a way to work together and live together, and it seems like they're going to have lots of fun hanging out, especially in that pool. Okay, now we're going to move on to the chocolate touch, and we're going to find out what happens to our friend John Midas. You might remember from last week, he started putting things into his mouth after he ate that piece of chocolate, his toothpaste, his eggs, his orange juice, and when it went in, all of it tasted just like, do you remember? Chocolate. All right, let's find out what happens when he goes to school. John had the bad habit of chewing things when he was thinking hard. This morning, he had several things to think about. What had made the toothpaste taste like chocolate? What had made the orange juice taste like chocolate? What had made the bacon and eggs taste like chocolate? What had made the toast and butter and marmalade taste like chocolate? Each one of these things had felt the way it had always felt before. The toothpaste had been soft and pasty. The bacon had been hot, crisp, and oily. The toast had been crunchy and the marmalade sticky and lumpy. But everything had tasted like the chocolate he had eaten in bed last night. John put a gloved thumb in his mouth and thoughtfully chewed. His mother had frequently pointed out to him that chewing his gloves made little holes that let in cold air. But he chewed them just the same when he was thinking hard. This time he noticed something very strange about the thumb of his glove. Instead of tasting leathery, it tasted like chocolate. John pulled his thumb out of his mouth. The part of the glove that had been in his mouth was now brown instead of black like the rest. He bit the end of the leathery thumb again. It came right off in his mouth, leaving his own thumb bare. John chewed, and it was like chewing leather made of chocolate, leather that melted like chocolate. In a second or two, he swallowed it. The gloves were not new. John had had them quite a while. He couldn't understand why he had never thought of eating them before. He tried to tear off one of the fingers, but the leather was too strong for him. He put it into his mouth, and it immediately turned into chocolate. Then he was able to break it off easily. He popped it into his mouth and chewed it up and swallowed it. It was delicious. Walking along, devouring his glove, John did not notice one of his school friends, Spider Wilson, until he heard his voice. "John's gone crazy! John's gone crazy!" Spider yelled. Then he turned on John. "Don't they feed you where you live?" He sneered. Spider was in the grade just above John's and was one of the meanest and slyest boys in the whole school. John gulped down a large piece of the second glove's palm and looked pleased. "What's the matter?" Spider demanded. "Do your people make you eat leather?" "This is special leather," John replied. He licked his lips and sighed contentedly. "It turns into chocolate as soon as you put it into your mouth. Look!" John bit off a piece of the glove's little finger and put it into his mouth. "Now it's chocolate." And then he put it back into his mouth and gulped it down. "Give me a piece," Spider said. "Why should I?" John wanted to know. "They're my gloves." "Hand over a piece," Spider said. "Do I eat your gloves?" John asked reasonably, his mouth full of chocolate. "Why should you eat mine?" "Those aren't real gloves," Spider said. "Whenever one person has candy, he has to share it with the others. That's the club rule." "What club?" John asked. "Never mind what club," Spider said, "but you'd better let me have some of that chocolate." Without waiting longer, Spider snatched what was left of the second glove. John was too surprised to resist, and he didn't want to anyhow. He had a feeling that he'd had enough chocolate for a while. He was getting a little bit thirsty. Spider ran only a little way ahead. When he saw that John wasn't going to fight to get the glove back, he started to eat his prize. He stuffed the leather into his mouth and took a big bite. Spider stopped short in his tracks. He frowned and bit deeper into the leather again. Disgusting! It tasted worse than leather. It tasted like leather with which a boy had made mud pies and snowballs and patted old dogs. John thought perhaps he might be getting late for school, so he started running. He left Spider Wilson spitting the soggy remains of the glove into the gutter. Still giggling to himself about the defeat of the enemy, John walked between the great stone pillars at the entrance of the school grounds. He had gone no more than halfway to the main building when he heard Susan Buttercup calling him. She was standing near the jungle gym with some friends of hers. "I've got something to show you, John," she shouted. As she came running to meet him, he could see that she was waving something in her hand that flashed as it caught rays of the sun. It was a silver dollar. "It's a birthday present," she explained, showing him the dollar. "Isn't it beautiful?" Excuse me. The sight of such wealth made John forget the triumphs of his own day. "It's a good present," he said. "Are you sure it's made of silver, though? I once got a whole bag of gold coins in a Christmas stocking, only they were chocolate coins covered with gold paper." "Of course it's real, silly," Susan said. "My daddy said so. You can feel it if you don't believe me." She handed him the coin. John looked at the coin suspiciously. "All right," Susan said. "Bite it if you think it isn't real. Go on, bite it." John felt rather silly. "I can see that it's real now," he said. "I don't have to bite it." "But I want you to," Susan insisted. "You weren't sure." "Well, make sure. That's what they always do on television. When a cowboy wants to make sure a dollar's real, he bites it." John put the dollar about halfway into his mouth and reluctantly bit it. His teeth went right through the coin. The part that had passed between his lips was hard but sweet chocolate. Susan could hardly believe her eyes. She had given John a complete circle of silver. He sadly handed back a crescent. John didn't know what to say. Susan couldn't speak. Tears trickled down her cheeks like rain down a window pane. She looked at the piece of dollar in her hand. She looked up at John, whose face was red with embarrassment. "John Midas," Susan blurted out at last, "I hate you." She turned and ran away before John could think of anything at all to say. Chapter 5. John hung up his coat, got his notebook and pencil out of his locker, and sat down at the small table just in time for the second bell when Miss Plimsoll walked silently into the classroom. As soon as she appeared in the doorway, all the chattering and scuffling stopped. The 20 boys and girls sat straight in their chairs and looked straight ahead at the clean blackboard. "Good morning, children," Miss Plimsoll said. "Good morning, Miss Plimsoll," the class answered respectfully. Miss Plimsoll sat at her high desk, blinking her eyes and surveying the room. Then she opened a little drawer in her desk and pulled out a spectacles case from which she took her reading glasses. She removed her long-distance glasses, put on her short-distance glasses, snapped shut the spectacles case, replaced it in the drawer, shut the drawer, tilted her head forward so that she could look over the class over her nose, and said, "This morning, children, we are going to have an important test." There were some groans and a few "ugh" and ahs. Miss Plimsoll lifted up one of her hands, and silence was restored instantly. "No complaining, please," she said sternly. "This test will show me how well you've been learning your arithmetic this year. It will be a short one. I'm going to write just 4 problems on the board. I shall expect you to solve them all swiftly and accurately, and to write your answers neatly. You will place your paper in front of you now. You will write your name at the top right-hand corner, and then you will place your pencil beside your paper. Sit back in your chair and wait until I give the signal to begin work." Miss Plimsoll turned to the blackboard and began chalking up the test problems. Tests always made John nervous. Besides, his lips were feeling dry, and the taste of chocolate was strong in his mouth. He raised his hand. "Yes, John," Miss Plimsoll asked. "Please may I go get a drink of water, please, Miss Plimsoll?" he asked in a small voice. "Very well. Hurry back. We're going to start in a few minutes." John gratefully slipped out of the room and walked quickly down the hall to the water fountain. His tongue felt thick with chocolate. The cold water would be refreshing. He pressed his foot down on the fountain treadle, and the steam of clear, ice-cold water spurted up from the silver nozzle in the white enamel basin. He lowered his head until the jet of water reached his lips. The cold water splashed delightfully against the outside of his mouth. He opened his lips. As soon as the water gushed in, it turned to ice-cold chocolate water, thin and sweet. Quickly stopping the flow, John looked with dismay at the shallow puddle that had formed and that was now draining away in the basin of the fountain. He hurried to another fountain on the second floor of the building. But there the same thing happened. The clear, ice-cold water turned to liquid chocolate in his mouth. When John finally got back to his classroom, all the other pupils were bent over their tables, busily scratching away. Miss Plimsoll looked up from her book as John tiptoed in. She looked at the clock on the wall, looked back at him, and wagged her finger reprovingly. John began on the first of the 4 problems, but he was so worried about the chocolate water he couldn't keep his mind on his work. By the time he was ready to start the 4th problem, the other boys and girls were already putting down their pencils and straightening up and smiling at each other. 2 minutes to go, Miss Plimsoll said. Concentrating hard, John took the end of the pencil between his teeth and began to nibble it. It immediately turned to chocolate. Then he noticed an even more disturbing change. Although he had taken the pencil out of his mouth, as soon as the first piece of chocolate had crumbled off, the pencil was continuing to change to chocolate. The chocolate was slowly but steadily moving down the pencil, replacing the wood and the lead inside, changing it into a chocolate pencil before John's very eyes. The magic, for John now knew that this power must be magic, was apparently getting stronger. By the time the whole pencil had changed from red, yellow, and black to dark brown, Miss Plimsoll was announcing that only a few seconds remained in which to write down the final answer. "Just a minute," John pleaded. "Shh," Miss Plimsoll cautioned him, holding up a finger to her mouth. "Shh," chorused the slow workers, who were becoming almost as excited as John. But John felt worst of all. He felt sure that he could finish the problem and write down the correct answer if only he had something to write with. "But Miss Plimsoll," he begged in a loud whisper, "my pencil's turned to chocolate." "Hush, John," Miss Plimsoll said. "I'll speak to you after the bell." John tried to write with his changed pencil, but the point was too soft, and he only succeeded in making a chocolate smear where he should have written a 72. We're going to stop there. Poor John Midas. I hope that eventually all these things that are turning to chocolate start changing back to real things. We'll see what happens next week. All right, boys and girls, as always, I hope your teeth are brushed, I hope your jammies are on, and I hope you are tucked in tight. I hope you enjoyed this week's story and this week's chapters of The Chocolate Touch, and I can't wait to see you all at school tomorrow. Have a great night.